When I walked into the courtroom, my daughter laughed, and my son-in-law looked away. The moment stretched. The doors swung open at 9:04 a.m. on that Tuesday. I stepped into the foyer of the county courthouse. The air was crisp, cool. I could sense the quiet shifting as I approached the wood panel benches. Above, the skylight spilled pale light onto polished floors. People murmured in the gallery. I found a spot near the back, sat down, and glanced ahead. My daughter, Melissa Harding, sat on the front row. She wasn't looking at me yet. Her husband, Greg Harding, sat beside her. His posture was taut. I hadn't known this side of him. He looked away. His eyes drifted to his hands, the bench, anywhere but me. In that instant, I realized this wasn't just a lawsuit, not just legal. It was about us, the family. What had shifted? What we'd assumed we knew. The judge entered. The gavel sounded. I exhaled slowly, though I felt tight. Melissa turned then, looked at me, and she smiled. A laugh followed when the prosecutor called the case. Harding versus Harding. Deborah Harding, plaintiff. Melissa Harding and Gregory Harding, defendants. I turned my head to Greg. He didn't meet my eyes. He looked down. That laugh of hers echoed in my mind. This case had been building for months. I'd known something was off when I saw the signed receipts, the bank transfers, the emails that said, "Thanks, Dad, all set, and love you." I believed then that trust covered the groundwork, that what I'd done, supporting her business venture, was clear. But trust alone doesn't hold when one side records a grin and the other side refuses to look. When the opening statements began, I sat rigid. Melissa's attorney stood, laid out the claim: economic misconduct, broken promise, damages, request for remedy. The phrasing was precise. "We will show the defendant withheld funds promised for business investment," he said. "We will ask the court to hold her accountable." Melissa turned slightly toward Greg. He fiddled with a pen. I could see it, an act I had never seen. I swallowed. Then I thought of her at 6 years old, the night she drew her first picture of our house. She clutched my hand. Now she sat across from me. I asked myself, how did we get here? If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, type "trust broken" in the comments right now. It helps this story reach others who've been through the same pain. And if you want to see how this case unfolds, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next changes everything. I looked at the accountant called by the defense. He reported deposits, dates. My records matched mine. There was a moment during his testimony when Melissa shifted in her seat. Greg's eyes flicked toward me. They looked away again. That laugh of hers, so subtle. But I heard it echo. Lunch was called. We all went to the corridor. I stood outside the courtroom door, leaned against the cool stone. Melissa and Greg walked past me, together, whispering. Melissa chuckled again. Greg's head tilted downward. I didn't interrupt them. I walked back to the gallery, felt the weight of two worlds, legal fact and personal relationship. When we returned, I watched as Greg took the stand. The hush in the courtroom deepened. His voice was quieter than I expected. The questions came. Did you maintain the ledger? Did you record all transfers? He hesitated. The hush expanded. Melissa's eyes locked on me. Then she glanced away. Greg stared at the floor. In that moment, I understood. The case wasn't just numbers. It was control, power. Who got to name the truth? I clenched my fists under the bench. I realized that this proceeding, with legal forms and judges and records, was also a reckoning of our history, our roles, our alliance, our trust. As the session paused, I let my mind rewind. The promise I made her, the handshake we shared, the belief that I was doing something good. And now, this courtroom, those rows of benches, the silent watchers, all of it became a mirror. And then I breathed. The story had just begun. Long before the courtroom, there was a kitchen table, a family dinner, and a conversation that should have stayed simple. It was a spring evening 2 years earlier. The window was open, the smell of rain drifted in, and my daughter, Melissa, sat across from me with a folder full of plans. She had a spark in her eyes, the kind I used to have when I started my own business. She said, "Dad, Greg and I found something amazing. It's not risky. We just need a small push to get started." I remember smiling. How much of a push? She slid the folder over. Inside were spreadsheets, mock-ups, and a business name, Coastal Candle and Home, a small batch candle company that she swore would go viral on Instagram. Greg nodded beside her, silent but confident. "We've already ordered the first shipment of wax," he said. "We just need the startup capital to scale before the holidays." They asked for $48,000. It wasn't a small number, but she was my only child, the same girl I used to drive to ballet practice at 6 a.m. I didn't even blink. I said yes. We shook hands, we hugged, and Melissa whispered, "You'll never regret this." I didn't know then that those 4 words would echo in my head the day she laughed in court. For the first 6 months, things looked promising. Photo shoots, online orders, glowing reviews. I visited their new office downtown, a tiny space filled with boxes and optimism. Melissa hugged me and said, "It's really happening." But small cracks appeared. Late replies to emails, missed updates, unexplained withdrawals. Greg stopped answering my calls altogether. When I finally asked for a financial report, Melissa texted back one line, "We'll explain everything later." Later never came. A few weeks passed. One morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. A transfer attempt flagged as irregular. I checked. The amount matched the remainder of the business loan. I drove straight to their office. The door was locked. A handwritten sign read, "Closed for inventory." But inside, through the frosted glass, I could see boxes missing, shelves bare. I called Melissa. No answer. I called Greg. Straight to voicemail. That's when I knew something was wrong. I contacted the supplier listed on their invoices. The man on the phone said calmly, "They canceled their account last month. Said they were moving operations to Florida." Florida? They'd never mentioned Florida. That night, I went through my files. Every email, receipt, message, and realized how much I had trusted my daughter's words without verifying the details. I thought I was investing in her dream. I didn't realize I was about to become a defendant in her story. The following month, a letter arrived. Harding versus Harding. I opened it twice to be sure I'd read it right. My daughter was suing me for breach of promise, claiming I withheld the last portion of her investment. The irony was painful. She had already emptied the account. I called her that evening. No answer. I left a message. "Melissa, I'm not angry. I just need to understand." No response. 3 weeks later, I saw them in the courthouse lobby for the first time. Greg's eyes flicked to mine and away again. Melissa laughed when the clerk called my name. I stood there, heart thudding, remembering that dinner table. The rain, the handshake, the promise. If you've ever trusted someone's word more than paperwork, type "trust" meant something in the comments. It lets me know you're still with me, and it tells YouTube that this story deserves to be heard. Now, here's where the story shifts. During pre-trial discovery, I uncovered something Melissa and Greg never expected me to find. An email chain, accidentally left in a shared cloud folder, between them and a man named Jacob Rhodes. Jacob wasn't part of the family business. He wasn't even in the candle trade. He was a real estate broker from Tampa. And the email subject line read, "Transferring funds, Coastal Partnership." Attached was a bank routing slip. The amount? $42,000, the exact figure that had gone missing from my account. The first twist wasn't that my daughter had lied. It was who she'd lied with, and why. But that's the part that came later, after the judge asked a question nobody in that courtroom expected. The morning after finding that email, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. The subject line, "Transferring funds, Coastal Partnership," burned into my mind like a brand. I printed every page, spread them across the table, and began to connect the dots. Jacob Rhodes, a name I'd never heard before, a man from Tampa who, according to his signature line, worked at Bayline Property Group. I searched him online. Real estate licenses, investment blogs, multiple shell companies. Nothing about candles, nothing about Melissa or Greg. Then I opened one of the attachments again. It wasn't a business invoice. It was a property acquisition form, a beachfront retail space listed under Coastal Candle and Home LLC. But the co-signers were Greg Harding and Jacob Rhodes. Not Melissa, not me. That meant my money had been used to buy commercial property under a partnership I'd never approved. At first, I thought maybe Melissa didn't know. Maybe Greg and Jacob acted without her. But another email crushed that hope. It was short, just a sentence. But enough. "Dad will never check the account. Let's move before he asks." She'd written it. Melissa herself. That was the moment the betrayal became real. I remember walking outside, the morning light hitting the pavement, the quiet hum of traffic. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt heavy. You raise a child to trust her instincts, to build something of her own. You never imagine she'll weaponize that trust against you. That night, I called my lawyer, Daniel Cross. He listened silently as I read the emails aloud. When I finished, he said one thing: "We're not dealing with misunderstanding anymore. This is intent." We filed a motion for discovery. The next hearing was scheduled for April 18th. In court, the atmosphere shifted. The judge allowed digital evidence. Melissa's attorney looked nervous. Greg sat motionless. When Daniel began presenting the email chain, the entire room seemed to tighten. He read Melissa's words slowly. "Dad will never check the account. Let's move before he asks." Then he turned to the defendant's table. "Ms. Harding, can you confirm this is your email address?" Melissa hesitated. She looked toward Greg. Greg didn't meet her eyes. He stared at the table. "Yes," she whispered. "Can you explain what you meant by 'move before he asks'?" She swallowed. It was taken out of context. "What context?" No answer. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Harding, answer the question." Her lawyer intervened, requesting a recess. The request was denied. Then Daniel displayed the property form on the projector screen. "Your Honor, this is a purchase order dated 3 days after the transfer from my client's account. The funds match, line for line." The judge asked who Jacob Rhodes was. Melissa said softly, "A friend helping with business logistics." But Greg's expression cracked. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since the trial began, he spoke up without being prompted. "He's not just a friend. He owns half the property." The room erupted in murmurs. The judge struck the gavel once. "Order in the court." Melissa turned sharply toward Greg, whispering something, but microphones caught fragments. "You promised. You said he'd never know." Greg's voice barely audible. I couldn't lie under oath. The entire narrative flipped in a second. For months, I had imagined this as a financial dispute. Father versus daughter. But now, it was triangulated. Greg, Jacob, and Melissa, each playing a different role. That was the first time I saw Melissa's face change. Not defiance anymore, but panic. She glanced at me, almost pleading, then looked away. And I realized the case had just grown larger than all of us. If you're still here, you're part of this investigation now. Type "I'm still watching" in the comments so I know you caught this twist. And make sure you've subscribed. Because what the judge uncovers next leaves the entire courtroom speechless. When the hearing ended that day, I walked out into the courthouse hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Reporters hovered near the exit, whispering about family fraud and hidden partnership. As I passed, one of them asked, "Mrs. Harding, do you believe your daughter was coerced?" I stopped walking. "I believe my daughter made a choice," I said quietly. "And we all have to live with the choices we make." But in truth, I wasn't sure anymore who was leading whom. Because 2 nights later, my lawyer received an anonymous package at his office. No return address, no note. Inside were 3 USB drives, each labeled simply CCH, Rhodes Files. And that's where the real story began to unravel. It was 2 days after that hearing. My lawyer, Daniel Cross, called at 6:47 a.m. His tone was sharp, not rushed, but deliberate. "Deborah," he said, "I need you to come to the office. Someone dropped something off last night." I arrived 40 minutes later. The city was barely awake. Inside his office, the lights were dim, the blinds half closed. On his desk sat a small brown envelope with 3 USB drives neatly lined up, each labeled in the same black marker, CCH, Rhodes Files. Daniel slid one toward me. No note, no signature. Just this. It was left in our mailbox after hours. He inserted the first drive. The screen came to life. A folder appeared. Dozens of audio files, timestamps spanning over a year. The file names read like entries. Meeting so 4/17. Warehouse call. Investor dinner. Daniel clicked the first one. At first, just static. Then, voices. Greg's, Melissa's, and a third, unmistakably male, Jacob Rhodes. Jacob. "The transfer clears Monday. After that, the account's locked." Greg. "He's not going to check?" Melissa. "Dad trusts me. He always has." Jacob. "Then we move quick. The Florida space closes next week." Silence. Then a faint clink of glasses. Someone laughs. It wasn't business planning. It was celebration. Daniel paused the file. His expression barely moved, but his voice tightened. "These aren't just conversations. These are admissions." We played the next clip. It was shorter, but worse. You could hear Melissa's voice lower. "If he finds out, we'll just say it was a misunderstanding. He'll never take it to court. He hates conflict." My heart sank. I'd always been proud of how calm I was, how I avoided confrontation, and she knew it. She counted on it. I sat back in the chair, staring at the muted city skyline outside the window. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. The second drive was even more damning. It contained screenshots of text messages, bank statements, and one folder labeled Recordings, Warehouse. Inside were audio clips captured in an echo-filled room. You could hear boxes being moved, doors closing. Jacob. "We'll say the funds were a loan." Greg. "He'll ask for proof." Jacob. Then make some. Daniel stopped the playback. That's fabrication, he said. That's intent to defraud. He printed the transcripts, sealed them in evidence folders, and locked the drives away. Then he looked at me directly. This changes everything. We're moving from civil to criminal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those voices. My daughter's calm tone, Greg's nervous laugh, Jacob's confidence. I went to my study, opened the old family photo album. There she was, 8 years old, holding a blue ribbon from her first science fair. Her handwriting across the label read, "Truth always wins." I whispered it aloud. Truth always wins. The words felt hollow now, but I needed to believe them. By the next hearing, Daniel had submitted the recordings under seal. The prosecution reviewed them overnight. The next morning, the judge allowed limited playback for verification. The courtroom filled early. Reporters lined the back wall. I sat in the same seat as before. Third row, aisle side. When the first clip played through the speakers, you could hear Jacob's voice echo across the room. Dad trusts me. He always has. Melissa froze. Greg looked down again, same as the first day. But this time his hands trembled. The judge's brow furrowed. "Ms. Harding, are these your words?" Melissa didn't answer. Her attorney whispered something. The judge repeated, "Answer the question." Finally, she nodded. "Yes." The sound of typing from the court reporter was the only thing breaking the silence. If you're still watching right now, type "Truth wins" in the comments. It's not just for me. It tells the algorithm this story deserves to be seen by more people who've ever been lied to by someone they loved. And hit the like button, because the next few minutes will change everything. Then Daniel requested permission to play one final clip from the third drive, one labeled "Call Investors." The judge agreed. It started with Jacob's voice again. "If this gets messy, we'll shift the blame. Say the money came from Greg's inheritance. There's no trace once we close the account." Then Melissa interrupted him. "It's not Greg's inheritance. It's Dad's savings." Jacob laughed. "Then you better hope he never checks." And that was it. The courtroom erupted. Melissa's attorney requested immediate recess. The judge denied it. He looked directly at Melissa. "You understand the seriousness of these recordings?" She nodded, silent. The judge turned to Greg. "Mr. Harding, did you participate in this?" Greg's voice cracked. "I didn't want to. He said it was temporary." "Who is he?" "Jacob Rhodes." "Where is he now?" Greg swallowed. "Florida. He disappeared last month." The judge leaned back. "Then, this case isn't over. Not by a long shot." That's how a family dispute turned into an interstate investigation. And that's when the story truly began to unravel. Because the next call didn't come from my lawyer. It came from the FBI. 3 days after that hearing, I woke to a phone vibrating on the nightstand. The caller ID read Federal Bureau of Investigation. I answered slowly. "Mrs. Harding, this is Special Agent Coleman with the Jacksonville Field Office. We're contacting you regarding a man named Jacob Rhodes. Are you available to speak?" I sat up. "Yes. What's happened?" "There's been a complaint and an ongoing investigation involving multiple investors across 3 states. We believe your case may be connected." He didn't have to say more. I already knew he was right. The next morning, I drove to the federal building downtown. Fluorescent lights hummed above the metal detectors. Agent Coleman met me in the lobby, tall and composed, the kind of calm that carries authority. He led me to a small conference room where another agent, Linda Park, waited with a laptop. Coleman began, We've been tracking a series of property flips tied to Jacob Rhodes. Each venture follows the same pattern: rapid funding, false partners, disappearing assets. You're the first family connection we've seen. He clicked through a slideshow. Storefronts in Tampa, Sarasota, and Orlando. Each had a "closed for renovation" sign. Everyone traced back to the same LLC signature: Coastal, Candle, and Home. My stomach tightened. So, Melissa's company was part of a chain? Agent Park nodded. It was the fifth. Each one lasted 6 months before being liquidated. I stared at the screen. The branding, the packaging, everything was identical. It wasn't a business. It was a front. They showed me bank records obtained under subpoena. My funds were one of 7 identical transfers, each labeled Initial Capital Injection. Coleman explained that Rhodes used relatives or close friends of his partners to fund each venture. Once the assets were liquidated, the money moved through offshore accounts. "Where is he now?" I asked. "He vanished 3 weeks ago," Coleman said. "His phone's inactive. Last ping in Panama City Beach. But there's one lead left, a property lease under his name in Jacksonville. That's why we called you. We want you to identify something for us." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were printed surveillance stills from a storage facility. The face in the frame was unmistakable: Greg Harding. That afternoon, agents visited Melissa's house with a search warrant. I wasn't there, but Daniel told me what they found: receipts, a duplicate ledger, and a prepaid phone registered under Jacob Rhodes' alias. Melissa denied knowing about it. Greg, however, admitted he'd met Rhodes 2 days after the court hearing. Rhodes promised to fix everything if Greg retrieved certain documents from storage. When the agents opened the unit, they found boxes of ledgers, contracts, and a black binder labeled Backup Accounts. Inside were wiring instructions for 7 offshore transfers, including mine. That evening, Coleman called again. "We've issued a federal warrant for Rhodes. Your daughter and son-in-law are listed as cooperating witnesses for now." "For now?" I asked. "It depends on how much they knew." I thanked him and hung up. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. I looked at the wedding photo on the mantel, the 3 of us smiling, and felt an ache that no verdict could repair. If you've ever discovered a truth that shattered your peace, type "The truth hurts" in the comments. It helps this story reach others who've lived through betrayal. And if you want to know what the FBI found inside that storage unit, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part reveals what no one in that courtroom ever expected. A week later, the FBI requested another interview. This time they showed me something I hadn't seen before: a transcript from a recorded phone call between Rhodes and Greg, dated the night before Rhodes disappeared. Greg's voice was tense. "She's scared. She wants to come clean." Jacob Rhodes replied, "She'll be fine as long as she keeps quiet." "You both will." Greg said, "What about the files?" Jacob answered, "They'll never find them." That line froze me. They'll never find them. Coleman leaned forward. "We think he left something behind. Leverage. Evidence that protects him if anyone talks." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. He paused. "Mrs. Harding, one of the drives we recovered had your name on it. You might want to sit down before we open it." The screen flickered, loading a single video titled "Insurance Harding." When it played, I saw Melissa sitting across from Jacob Rhodes, signing a document while the camera recorded. Jacob's voice: "This confirms the transfer of ownership from Deborah Harding to Coastal, Candle, and Home, correct?" Melissa nodded. "Yes. Do you understand? This makes you the sole financial beneficiary?" "Yes," he smiled. "Good. Then we're done here." The footage ended. Agent Park turned to me. This wasn't supposed to surface. It's his insurance. He recorded everyone he worked with. I sat in silence. My own daughter had signed away my name on paper I'd never seen. That was the moment the story stopped being about money or contracts. It became about truth and consequence. Because by the end of that week, the FBI issued an international alert, and Jacob Rhodes was officially on the run. 2 weeks after the FBI alert, the story hit national television. Reporters called it the Coastal Candle Scheme. Every major outlet had the same headline: a family business built on lies and missing millions. My phone didn't stop ringing. Friends, former co-workers, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years wanted to know if it was true. The coverage played like a slow burn. They aired the courtroom clips, the audio recordings, even a blurred still of Melissa standing beside Jacob Rhodes. I sat alone in my living room, watching the same face I used to kiss goodnight, now tied to federal headlines. It didn't feel real. Greg's photo appeared next, followed by Rhodes's mugshot from an old real estate license file. The anchor's voice said he was believed to have fled the country using a fake passport. They listed 7 states involved and over $2 million unaccounted for. Then came my name. The primary investor and complainant, Deborah Harding. I muted the television. My house felt small. The silence pressed down heavy. I thought about calling Melissa, but every time I tried, I stopped. What would I even say? That night, the FBI released a public statement. They confirmed the manhunt had expanded to the Gulf Coast, and a federal task force was coordinating with local authorities. Agents combed through marina records, private airfields, and shipping manifests. Coleman called to update me. "We think Rhodes may still be in Florida," he said. "He's not gone yet." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something close to hope. 2 days later, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Melissa. She hadn't called first. She stepped out wearing a hoodie, hair tied back, eyes swollen from crying. For a long time, neither of us spoke. She finally said, "Dad, I need help." We sat at the kitchen table. She looked smaller than I remembered. She told me she hadn't known the full scope of what Rhodes was doing, that he'd promised quick returns, easy paperwork, a way to make their business look legitimate on paper. She said Greg had believed him, and by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. I wanted to believe her, but the recordings wouldn't leave my mind. Her own words, "Dad trusts me. He always has." I asked her why she signed that document. She said she didn't remember signing it, that Rhodes must have slipped it into a stack of contracts. Her voice trembled when she said, "I never meant for any of this to hurt you." Then she broke. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. For the first time since the lawsuit, I saw my daughter again. Not the businesswoman, not the defendant, but the child I'd raised. I didn't speak. I just let her cry. When she finally looked up, she said, "They want me to testify against him, the FBI. They said if I cooperate, they'll drop the charges." I nodded slowly. "Then you tell them everything, every call, every meeting, every word he ever said." She nodded. "I will." If you've ever had to forgive someone before knowing the whole truth, type "forgiven but hurt" in the comments. It helps this story reach others walking the same tightrope between anger and love. And hit that like button, because what happens next proves that even the guilty can still save someone else's life. The next morning, Melissa met with Agent Coleman. She turned over her phone, laptop, and every document she had. In exchange, she was placed under witness protection while Rhodes was still at large. The agents believed she could help lure him out. They set up monitored communication, using her old email accounts as bait. For 10 days, nothing happened. Then, on the 11th night, an email came through from an unfamiliar address. It read, "I heard what you told them. You shouldn't have. Meet me. Last time." The message came from a public Wi-Fi network in Pensacola. The FBI traced it within an hour. A surveillance team moved in. At 3:12 a.m., agents surrounded a rental house near the marina. A light flickered inside. They entered quietly. The place was empty except for a single duffel bag on the kitchen counter and a phone left charging beside it. Inside the bag was cash, fake IDs, and an unmarked key. The phone vibrated once with a text message. It was from Greg. "Are you safe?" That was how the FBI knew he was still in contact with Rhodes. By sunrise, Greg Harding was in custody. Melissa's cooperation confirmed what agents suspected all along. Rhodes had used their marriage as leverage. He'd convinced Greg to move money for him, telling him it was temporary, promising to repay everything once the heat died down. But the heat never died down. It spread. The same day Greg was arrested, the Bureau released surveillance photos from Panama City. Rhodes was spotted boarding a private vessel 2 nights earlier. The captain later claimed he paid cash for the trip, said little, and left the boat at a refueling stop near Key West. From there, he disappeared into the ocean. No passport, no trace. Only that duffel bag left behind. When Coleman called me later, his tone was grim. "We may never find him," he said. "But thanks to your daughter's testimony, every account he opened is frozen. He won't get far," I asked quietly. "And Greg?" "Awaiting sentencing. He's cooperating too." That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the light fade through the trees. The air was still, warm, almost peaceful. But I knew peace would never feel the same again. The case was over on paper, but not in my heart. The courtroom, the drives, the recordings, they had become part of me. Trust once lost doesn't return in full. It lingers, half-healed, like a scar you can feel even when you can't see it. And yet, part of me wanted to believe that maybe, somehow, this ending could still mean something more. The manhunt ended quietly. No final chase, no dramatic capture, just a slow fading of updates until even the news anchors stopped mentioning Jacob Rhodes's name. The FBI kept the case open, but everyone knew what that meant. He was gone. Melissa's cooperation earned her conditional immunity. Greg's sentence was reduced to 2 years in federal custody. When the verdict came down, she didn't attend. She told me she couldn't. Instead, she stayed in a small rented apartment outside of town, under a temporary protection order. The press, though, didn't let her disappear. Cameras waited outside her door for weeks. Every time she stepped out for groceries, someone shouted questions. "Did you know about the fraud? Did your father forgive you? Where's Rhodes?" She never answered. She just kept walking. The story turned into a national headline for one last cycle. Morning shows ran graphics that said, "Father betrayed, daughter redeemed." That word, redeemed, didn't sit right with me. Redemption isn't something you declare. It's something you prove. After a while, the world moved on to the next scandal. The house felt quieter than ever. I stopped watching the news altogether. I kept the shades half drawn, not because I was hiding, but because I was tired of seeing my own reflection on the glass, tired of remembering how all of this began. Weeks passed before Melissa called again. Her voice was calm but distant. "Dad," she said, "they want to film an interview, one of those true story specials. They said it could help people understand what happened." I didn't respond right away. Then I asked, "Do you want people to understand?" Or do you want them to forgive you? She paused. Maybe both. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't. I already knew my answer. Some stories shouldn't be retold for sympathy. Some should just be remembered for the lessons they leave behind. If you're watching this, and you've ever had the world misunderstand your pain, type, "I remember everything" in the comments. It helps this story reach the ones still living with quiet scars the public never sees. And make sure you've subscribed, because what happens next will show how truth can break a person, but also rebuild them in ways they never expected. A month later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in thin handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside were 2 sentences. "I'm sorry for what I took. I can't undo it, but I can stop lying about it. You were right. Truth always wins." It was signed Melissa. No phone call, no address, just that note. I sat there holding it for a long time, trying to feel something like relief. But it wasn't relief. It was exhaustion. That night, I walked to the old filing cabinet in my study. Inside were all the case documents, the ledgers, the statements, the transcripts, the drives. I placed the letter on top and closed the drawer. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel the need to look back. The next morning, I went to visit Greg. He was being held in a low-security facility an hour outside the city. The guard led me into a small visiting room with a metal table and 2 chairs. Greg entered quietly, thinner than before, wearing a simple gray uniform. He didn't try to defend himself. He just said, "I should have stopped it when I could." I nodded. "You should have." Then he said, "She's trying, you know. She's writing everything down. She says she wants to publish it one day. Call it a warning." I looked at him for a long time. A warning would have helped before the damage was done. He nodded, eyes wet. "I know." We sat there in silence until the guard returned. Before he left, Greg turned to me and said, "She still calls you her hero." I didn't respond. I just watched him walk away, shoulders slumped, until the door closed behind him. On the drive home, the sun was setting low across the highway. The sky looked washed out, almost colorless, but there was a strange calm to it. I realized something then. The story had started in a courtroom full of noise, but it was ending in silence. And maybe that was the only kind of justice that really lasts, the kind you make peace with when the world stops paying attention. When I got home, I found one last voicemail waiting on my phone. It was Melissa again. Her voice was steady this time. "Dad, I'm leaving for a while, somewhere quiet. I don't expect you to call. I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me completely." The message ended. No goodbye, no location, just quiet. I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, then pressed delete. Outside, the night air was still. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a train passing. And for the first time since walking into that courtroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: finality. Not forgiveness, not closure, but finality. Because sometimes the ending isn't justice. Sometimes it's just peace after chaos. And peace, when you've lost everything else, is enough. After everything settled, the story stopped being about courtrooms and investigations. It became about what happens to a person when the noise dies down. For months, I'd been driven by proof, by evidence, by the need to show who was right and who was wrong. But when the verdicts were done and the agents moved on, I was left with something quieter, heavier, the aftermath. I learned something about truth. It doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes truth feels like loss. You uncover it, you hold it in your hands, and realize it cost you everything you loved to get it. That's what no one tells you. Justice doesn't return what you lost. It just exposes what was already broken. I started to spend mornings walking along the edge of town, near the old pier. The same place where Melissa used to feed the ducks when she was little. The smell of salt water and rust reminded me of better days, simpler ones. There was something cleansing about those walks. No headlines, no cameras, just wind and memory. I thought often about how greed doesn't always begin with money. It begins with the need to feel control, to shape a life, to prove something to the world. That's what Jacob Rhodes understood about people. He didn't need to force them to steal. He just had to give them permission to believe they deserved more than what they had. And Melissa fell for that belief. So did Greg. Maybe, in smaller ways, I did too. I believed love would make her honest. I believed loyalty was stronger than ambition. I was wrong. But being wrong doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human. If you've ever lost something chasing the truth, type "I paid the price" in the comments. It helps push this story to others, still trying to make sense of their own endings. And hit that like button if you understand this. Truth doesn't heal you, but it frees you. Months passed. I received fewer calls from reporters. My name stopped trending online. The case became just another story in the archive, forgotten by most, remembered only by those it burned. But for me, it was never about fame or exposure. It was about breaking the silence of betrayal, about saying, "This happened, and I survived it." One afternoon, I got a message from Agent Coleman. His voice was calm. "Just thought you should know, the file on Rhodes remains open. But between you and me, he's not surfacing again. You can live your life now." I thanked him, and for the first time, I believed him. Not because Rhodes was gone, but because his shadow no longer owned my thoughts. That night, I pulled out Melissa's letter again. The ink had smudged a little at the edges, like she'd written it in a hurry, or with tears still on her face. I read it once more, quietly. The words didn't undo the past, but they softened something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The next morning, I began clearing out the old office. I found boxes of business paperwork, receipts, old holiday cards, half-burned candles from the company that started it all. I kept one, a small white candle with a faint lavender scent. I lit it, watched the flame steady itself, and thought about how fragile it looked. Small, but alive. I left it burning by the window. A reminder that light doesn't have to be loud to exist. Sometimes it just has to keep showing up, even when everything else has burned down. By evening, I sat outside as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and ash. I thought about Melissa somewhere out there trying to rebuild, about Greg counting days in a cell, about Rhodes drifting across oceans, maybe still looking over his shoulder. I realized then that every one of us had lost something to this story. Money, freedom, faith, but maybe that's what the world does. It takes, and in return, it gives you clarity. I closed my eyes and breathed in the last of the daylight. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It just was. And maybe that's what peace really is. Not forgetting what happened, not forgiving too soon, just living with the truth long enough until it stops cutting. Looking back, I've come to understand that betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like laughter in a courtroom. Sometimes it's a signature on a page you never saw. And sometimes it's silence. The kind that follows when everyone finally stops pretending. People like to believe justice feels like closure. But justice doesn't erase the memories. It just gives them new names: evidence, testimony, verdict. What stays behind are the ordinary moments that don't make it into the record. The smell of coffee on the morning you got the call, the sound of your child's voice the first time she lied to you, the way your hands shook when you realized she meant it. Those are the things no judge can account for. For a long time, I thought I needed to win. I thought the truth had to punish someone to mean something. But the truth doesn't punish. It reveals. It takes what's hidden and brings it into the light, whether you're ready or not. And when it does, you're faced with the hardest question of all: who are you when the lie is gone? If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone broke your trust, type "I'm still standing" in the comments. It shows others they're not alone in the quiet aftermath. And hit that like button, because what's coming next will remind you why stories like this matter. Not for the drama, but for the lesson buried inside them. I learned that strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. Of blame, of bitterness, of the version of someone you once loved. Letting go doesn't mean excusing what they did. It means refusing to let it define who you become. There were nights when I replayed everything, every conversation, every missed sign, and wondered if I could have stopped it. But life doesn't give you warnings you can understand in the moment. It gives you choices. I chose to trust. I chose to love. And yes, I paid for it. But I'd rather be someone who trusted too deeply than someone who never trusted at all. When you go through something like this, people tell you to move on. But moving on isn't about forgetting. It's about carrying the memory differently. Lighter, quieter, until it no longer drags behind you. Some nights, I still dream about that courtroom, the echo of the gavel, the sound of my daughter's laugh. But now, in those dreams, the sound doesn't sting. It just fades, like an echo at the end of a song you finally learned to stop repeating. This story started with a laugh and a look away. But it ends with something else. A choice to stop running from the truth, to stop letting it run me. I don't know if that's redemption, but it's enough. So if you've ever lived through something that changed you, don't wait for the world to understand it. You don't owe anyone your version of peace. You just have to find it, even if it takes everything you've got. It's strange how quiet life becomes after a storm. Months passed. The court files gathered dust. Reporters moved on. Even the FBI calls slowed, until one day they stopped altogether. The world forgot, but I didn't. Some stories don't end when the credits roll. They just change shape. I started spending mornings on the porch again. Same chair, same coffee mug, same view of the trees moving in the wind. The world looked unchanged, but I wasn't the same person who once walked into that courtroom. I'd lost things you can't list on paper. Certainty, innocence, the kind of faith that lets you sleep without questions. But I'd gained something quieter. The ability to see people as they are, not as I want them to be. One evening, as the light faded, I found that old candle from the coastal candle days. It was small, nearly spent, its label peeling at the edges. I set it on the table beside me and struck a match. The flame flickered weakly at first, then steadied. I watched it burn until the wax pooled clear. That light, tiny, almost nothing, was still alive. I thought about Melissa, about where she might be, maybe starting over somewhere far away, maybe walking down a quiet street trying to forget her own name. I thought about Greg finishing his sentence, learning what regret feels like when there's no one left to blame. And I thought about Jacob Rhodes, out there somewhere, still running from the same thing he built his life around. The truth. If you're still here, still watching this story unfold to its last breath, type, "I found my peace" in the comments. It tells me you made it through too. And before this candle burns out, hit the like button and subscribe. Because stories like this, real, painful, human, deserve to be remembered. The flame trembled once as the breeze slipped through the porch screen. I cupped my hand around it, protecting it just long enough for the wax to settle. Then I blew it out. The smoke rose in a thin, soft spiral before disappearing into the evening air. For a long time, I sat there in the fading light, the smell of lavender lingering. The world was quiet again, and maybe that was enough. Not justice, not redemption, just peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind you only recognize when it finally arrives. When I walked into that courtroom all those months ago, I thought I was fighting for what was mine. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was fighting for something deeper, the right to live honestly, even when honesty hurts. Now I know the truth doesn't just expose people. It frees you from the weight of pretending. And when the last flame goes out, that's what remains. Not the pain, not the loss, but the quiet certainty that you survived. The screen fades to black, and the last words that echo are not hers or his, but mine. I forgive her. Not because she deserves it, but because I do.